Welcome back to the Gardening with Joy and Holly radio show. Moments away, Hannah, Dela, Cruz. Going to be talking about baking and sourdough bread, so don't miss that. Hang out with us. But first, a message from our good friends from Simple Grow at Simple Grow.
Are you worried about your plant growth? Provide your plants with what they need to grow to their potential. Simple Grow offers 100% organic worm castings at simplegrow.com. Unlike other worm casting products, when you order from Simple Grow, you are getting 100% worm castings, not filler plus castings. Promote ideal soil structure and aeration with Simple Grow all-natural odor-free worm castings. There's only one ingredient, worm castings. No chemicals or additives will seep into your food. It doesn't smell like other fertilizers. For indoor and outdoor use, you can order by the bag, bundle, ton, or truckload. Check out Simple Grow 100% worm castings can do for your plants and order today at simplegrow.com.
Holly, let's go to the Proclamation Hotline, brought to you by Proclamation Goods, and bring in our guest for this week.
Hannah Dela Cruz is the creator and voice of Make It Dough. She is passionate about baking and sourdough. She loves sharing her passion with others and helping people learn how to make better bread. She is the author of Sourdough Every Day. Welcome to the program, Hannah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, we thank you for coming on the program and what the information you're about to educate Holly and myself and all of our listeners with. And I'll start with this before we get into the whole sourdough bread and all of that in your book. Were you always a baker, or was this something you caught on later in life?
I've been baking basically forever. I've always been passionate about it, but sourdough and bread making kind of came a little bit later. Around 2018 is when I actually baked my first ever bread. I baked some rolls, and then after that, I kind of got into the sourdough thing.
Well, many people know of sourdough bread, but what is it exactly? What else can you make with it besides just bread?
Yeah, so sourdough is basically a fermented mixture of flour and water. So if you mix flour and water together and you kind of leave it for a certain number of days, usually 7 to 10 days, then it kind of gets cultivated into this mixture that allows you to make bread with it. It develops, a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, and those microorganisms produce lactic acid bacteria and acetic acid bacteria and carbon dioxide that makes the flavor and the consistency of sourdough bread, which we all love. Yeah.
So are we putting this in a bowl with a towel over it? And is there a specific type of flour that should be used rather than just the cheap stuff you buy at the grocery store?
Yeah. So you can use any type of flour. You can use all-purpose, whole wheat, rye, or bread flour. I personally like to use unbleached organic all-purpose flour, just because bleaching tends to kill off a lot of the beneficial microorganisms that you want to cultivate in your starter. So most of the bacteria and yeast that are going to live in your starter are going to really mimic the makeup of your flour. So that's where mostly you're getting your microorganisms from. So you want to start with a really good quality flour. I prefer to do all-purpose because it tends to be a little bit less expensive than bread flour or whole wheat or any other specialty flours. But you can use those flours as well if you like to cultivate a whole wheat starter. But most recipes that you'll find online, and my recipes, call for a all white starter. So I just find that it's a little bit more, flexible and a little bit more adaptable to a lot of recipes that you'll find out there.
Now, when people are making bread or whatnot with this is the part that does the rising, right? Like, because you're not adding a yeast. This is the part that is responsible for the rising, the
lift.
The lift, yeah. Right? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so instead of using commercial yeast, you'll be using your sourdough starter.
Okay, fantastic. So you wrote this book, Sourdough Every Day.
Mm-hmm.
What can our listeners expect when they pick up a copy? Maybe there's something unique or interesting that will perk their interest.
Yeah, so I was inspired to write my book Sourdough Every Day because I had created so many sourdough discard recipes. So in the process of making your sourdough starter, in the process of creating your starter itself, and kind of taking care of it once you have it, you'll go through a process called feeding. So what feeding means is that you get rid of a lot of your starter and you just keep a little bit of it and you add more flour and water to it. And you do that because starter is, like I said, it's a community of bacteria and yeast, and those things are alive. Just like us, they need to eat. You know, they're born, they eat, they reproduce, and then after that they die. So feeding. So since those microorganisms are alive, you kind of have to keep giving them nutrients to survive. But if you didn't get rid of any of your starter, you'll just end up with so much that you're not going to be able to feed it enough flour and water. So you end up kind of with a lot of discard. And I started ending up with so much discard. And I started researching what I could do with that discard. And I started finding recipes for cookies and cakes. So that inspired me to create some recipes of my own. Because when I first started my sourdough journey, there weren't really a lot of discard recipes out there that were super creative. A lot of them were just waffles and pancakes. So those were the recipes that I kept finding. And then I kind of realized that, you know, starter is just flour and water. So if you can incorporate that in a recipe, you can end up with a lot of the benefits of sourdough, which is, you know, flavor, taste, moisture, and sometimes even fermentation. So a lot of the recipes in my book are actually sourdough discard recipes. So there's some cake recipes in there. There's cookie recipes. There's, of course, the breakfast recipes that we all love. And then there's also bread recipes and even pies and pastry.
Well, why would you encourage people to make sourdough? Now, I'm going to take, I'm not a doctor or anything, but I'm going to take the guess that because the culture of the sourdough, that probably has good beneficial gut health capabilities. Am I close on any of that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So basically starter, a lot of experts say that starter is healthier because the organisms actually digest the flour before you eat it. So there's a lot of nutrients in wheat that we can't absorb into our bodies because we don't have the enzymes to do it. So cows can eat wheat or grain and absorb all the nutrients from them because they have enzymes in their bodies that allow them to do that. And as human beings, we don't really have those enzymes. So that's why, there was a lot of fads about bread being really unhealthy. And that's because, we can't really uptake those nutrients in our bodies the same way that those animals can. And when you're fermenting your dough, those organisms are actually pre-digesting that flour for you so that those nutrients that are in wheat that we can normally not unlock get unlocked, and we can actually absorb them in our bodies. So it's a little bit more healthy for you than normal bread made with commercial yeast.
Well, and it seems to be the process for people who enjoy this type of thing. It's a little more interesting, fun, and if you do it as you've described, you will always have that starter, and you will always have that continuation if you can keep up with it. And it's not just bread. You can make a vast variety of things, and in turn, be healthier eating than just that traditional bread that we buy at the store that we really don't know what the heck is in it.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a fun hobby when you get kind of invested in it. You learn so much I personally have learned so much about microorganisms, the invisible world of bacteria and yeast and everything that's going on all around us that we can't really see. And and it's actually such a adaptable and flexible hobby. So a lot of people get kind of worried that, like, if they go on vacation, what are they going to do with their starter? You can actually keep your starter in the fridge and it'll survive even for like a month without being able to feed it. But you don't want your starter to get too weak because it could grow mold. So as long as you kind of keep on top of it, kind of feed it every now and then, it's a lot more flexible and adaptable than people think. And you don't really need all this kind of time invested in, but you do need a little bit of time investment into it, but you don't need to babysit your starter as much as people think.
And you just keep this on the counter. If you're not going to be traveling or going away, you can kind of keep it on the counter in a bowl. Is it okay?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So you can keep it, you can spend as much time on it as you want based on your schedule.
That's fantastic. So we were talking with Hannah Dela Cruz. She is an author of Sourdough Every Day, a passionate bread maker, and likes to teach other about it. So what are some common challenges with the sourdough? I know, as you mentioned, the discard dough, and then also just, keeping it fed. What are some challenges that people may face and want to keep in mind if they do start to make their own sourdough?
Yeah, so I think the main challenge with sourdough is that you have to have a lot of patience, especially when you're in that first process of creating your sourdough starter. So I think that's when a lot of people give up because they'll start making their starter. And then there's a period of time in the middle of creating your starter, in that 2-week period where your starter just won't show any activity. And that's because your culture, that world of yeast that you're trying to cultivate, is kind of still battling for dominance. So the beneficial yeast and the microorganisms that you want in your starter are kind of still trying to, rule your culture. And while it's trying to find that balance, you might not see any activity at all. But if you just continue feeding it and kind of continue feeding it on a normal schedule, then it'll survive, and then you'll see that it'll start getting bubbly and, be able to make your bread rise. But it takes a little while to get to that point. So I think a lot of people give up during that period. And then there's also challenges of, mastering bread making. Bread making can be quite difficult. It's not a skill that we're naturally born with. We're not, it's something that you kind of have to work at until you get like the result that you want. You get the open crumb that a lot of people want because they see pictures of it online. A lot of mastery kind of goes into that. So those are some of the challenges that kind of want people to give up. But that's the fun part about bread making, I think, is that, you're going to always be learning something new. And with every bake, you're going to improve. And it never gets boring.
Well, Hannah, we greatly appreciate the time you've offered us. Yes, go ahead. Holly's got to follow us. You're tuned in to the Gardening with Joy and Holly radio show.
Pretty easy to start with, right? Like to make, you just kind of need a home for it, some flour, water. And then at some point when you do add it to a recipe, is it something maybe you need like a food scale for? Or, if somebody were to want to do this and they're like, I don't know how much of a commitment dollar-wise I want to put in this, what would you say?
Yeah, so actually, you can actually make sourdough with a lot of stuff that you already have at home. You first of all need a jar to keep your starter in. You need some mixing bowls. I think people have that. I like to mix my dough by hand. So there's actually not a lot of special equipment necessary. You do have to have a Dutch oven. I think that's the easiest way to bake bread because you do need to bake with a little bit of steam. And then, as you mentioned, a tool that a lot of people probably don't already have that they would need to invest in to be a serious bread maker is a scale, because it's a little bit more accurate with measurement than volume. But a scale is super cheap. You can get a scale online for, maybe $10. I still have my $10 scale from 4 years ago that it's still there. I'm still using it. It still works. So there's not a lot of investment money-wise to start this hobby. Maybe you're going to use a lot more flour than you're used to. So, and flour prices are a little bit more expensive than it used to be, but it's still not that bad. I mean, a bag of really good flour maybe is $5 to $7, and that's really, the big investment that you have to you have to make.
It's beneficial though.
Yeah, it's beneficial.
There's a purpose behind that investment.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you keep your starter, if you keep it fed, if you keep it well maintained, if it's vigorous, healthy, and dependable, then it could even outlive you.
I've heard of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate having you on the show. How can people find out more about you and your book and your great info?
Yeah, sure. So my people can find my recipes and all my musings on my website, makeitdough.com. And I'm always on Instagram at makeitdough. I usually post on there every day. Some of you can get updated on my new recipes and everything else that's going on with Make It Dough on my Instagram.
Well, Hannah, we greatly appreciate the time and the education class that you've given Holly and myself and all of our listeners about how easy it is to make sourdough bread, because probably many of us thought this is something I don't want to do because it seems very difficult. We thank you for all of that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on your program.
Absolutely.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.